A mountain split in half or a god in chains. A war so violent, it broke the world. This is not something you see in any movie adaptation. This is way better and more interesting. The First Age of Middle-earth is the part of Tolkien's world where legends lived, gods walked, and elves went to war like kings. But behind the famous battles and beautiful songs are things most people never hear about. We're starting from the weirdest, darkest corners of the map. The First Age didn't begin in Middle-earth. It started far across the sea in a place called Aman. Deep in the west of Aman was a valley called Alqualondë, lush, full of silver willows and golden trees. There lived an elf named Eärendil, daughter of the sea elves. She married Finrod, a noble lord of the Noldor. Eärendil never set foot in Middle-earth. She stayed in Aman even after her husband returned from exile. That makes her the westernmost elf in Tolkien's history. Never touched by the wars, never exiled, never cursed. She was the mother of Galadriel, which means Galadriel, who walked through hell and back during the First Age, was the daughter of someone who never even saw a battlefield. Galadriel's mom lived in paradise while her daughter marched across frozen seas and fought Balrogs. Imagine coming home and trying to explain that. The god of evil, Melkor, later called Morgoth, was locked away for 3 ages by the Valar. That sounds brutal. But Tolkien explains in the Silmarillion that this punishment took place in the halls of Mandos, in the blessed realm of Aman. Mandos isn't a dungeon. It's not a hell pit. It's a divine hall of reflection. Melkor sat there, possibly in silence, possibly surrounded by angelic singing, while the Valar discussed whether he was ready to return. He wasn't tortured. He wasn't chained to a rock with fire dripping on his head. He basically got time out in paradise. And when they let him go, he walked out smiling, shook everyone's hand, and immediately started corrupting the elves. Everyone talks about Frodo going to Mount Doom or Aragorn taking the paths of the dead. But there's one elf who literally went to hell and returned alive. Beren and Lúthien is a love story, but Lúthien wasn't just some pretty elf maiden. She broke into Angband, the strongest fortress ever built by Morgoth, and put the entire place to sleep with a song. Then she stared down a god, stole a Silmaril from his crown, and escaped with her lover. That's not even the craziest part. Lúthien actually died later, followed Beren into the afterlife, and talked the god of death into bringing them both back. Tolkien said she was the most beautiful being ever to live. Turns out she was also the most dangerous. In Tolkien's canon, long before Twilight, Morgoth was already breeding monsters. Sauron in the First Age wasn't a flaming eyeball. He was a shapeshifter. And one of his favorite forms was a giant vampire bat with iron claws and a hunger for blood. And the werewolves? Oh, they were real. Morgoth bred them in his pits. They were wolf-bodied spirits, possessed by dark Maiar. And the biggest, meanest of them was Carcharoth, a wolf so huge he bit off Beren's hand, Silmaril and all, and went on a bloodthirsty rampage across Beleriand. Forget hobbits and rings. In the First Age, the monsters didn't hide under mountains. They sat on thrones. This is where things start getting bloody. When Fëanor, creator of the Silmarils, swore to reclaim them at all costs, he led the Noldor elves into rebellion. But they didn't have ships to sail to Middle-earth. So they asked the Teleri elves for help. The Teleri refused. Fëanor responded by ordering an attack on his own kin. This was the first Kinslaying. Elves murdered elves on the docks of Alqualondë. Blood soaked the ships. Bodies fell into the sea. And among the dead were the brothers of Olwe, the lord of the Teleri, Galadriel's uncle. This event tainted the Noldor forever. Even those who didn't take part, like Fingolfin and Galadriel, carried the weight of the crime. Fëanor got his ships, but the price was a curse from the gods and a war that would doom their entire line. If you're still here, you've officially learned more First Age lore than 99% of the internet. But be warned, the next entries, they're even worse. And yes, that's a threat. So do yourself a favor, like subscribe and hit that bell before Melkor decides your living room would make a lovely fortress. After the Kinslaying, Fëanor stole the Teleri's ships and finally reached the shores of Middle-earth. But he didn't bring all the Noldor. Fingolfin, Fëanor's half-brother, was still back in Aman with his people. Expecting Fëanor to return with the ships for them, he never did. Once ashore, Fëanor ordered the ships to be burned, lighting the coast of Lothscar in a towering blaze. His reasoning? They didn't need Fingolfin. The sons of Fëanor would take Middle-earth for themselves. That wasn't just betrayal, it was madness. The flames lit up the sky across the sea, and when Fingolfin saw it, he knew what had happened. Instead of turning back, he led his people across the Helcaraxa, a grinding, frozen wasteland of ice. Many died. Those who survived never forgot who left them behind. Galadriel was there. She didn't support the Kinslaying. She didn't speak during the oath. But she followed the exiles anyway, hungry for land, for freedom, and maybe even for her own kingdom. When Fëanor betrayed them, Galadriel crossed the Helcaraxa with her brother Finrod and the other loyal Noldor. This wasn't just cold, it was deadly. The Silmarillion says many fell into the ice and were lost. Mothers died carrying children. Friends fell behind and were never seen again. This moment shaped Galadriel for centuries. Her strength didn't come from power. It came from enduring cruelty, grief, and cold. By the time they arrived in Beleriand, Galadriel wasn't just a noble elf maid, she was a survivor. This one's still debated, but the darkest theory in Tolkien's canon is right there in the Silmarillion. When Morgoth first found the elves who had never seen the light of the Valar, he captured some of them and twisted them. The exact process is unknown, but it says they were corrupted and enslaved into mockeries of elvish form. Those were the first orcs. Tolkien was never fully satisfied with this idea. In later letters, he suggests that orcs may have been corrupted men or beasts infused with dark spirits. But in the First Age canon, the elves to orcs origin is still in play. So yes, every time the elves killed an orc in battle, they may have been killing a distant, twisted cousin. After Morgoth stole the Silmarils and fled to Middle-earth, Fëanor and his 7 sons swore an oath. They would pursue anyone, elf, man, or god, who tried to keep a Silmaril from them. It wasn't just a vow, it was a binding curse on their souls. They swore it in the name of Iaryu Ilúvatar, the creator of the world. And it didn't just ruin them. The oath-poisoned alliances triggered 3 kinslayings and turned the elves into weapons of destruction. Here's the worst part, they never even got the jewels. The oath was a trap Fëanor made for himself. And for generations, his sons died. Only 2 sons lived long enough to claim a Silmaril, and it destroyed them too. If you think elves are delicate and peaceful, let this break that image. Fëanor was the strongest of the Noldor, the most brilliant mind, the creator of the Silmarils, and also the most reckless. He didn't just curse Morgoth, he chased him into battle screaming for blood only days after landing in Middle-earth. Fëanor fought alone against a host of Balrogs, actual fire demons, and was mortally wounded by Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs himself. But even dying, he wasn't done. Tolkien writes that Fëanor's spirit burned so hot that his body turned to ash, and his soul refused to go to the halls of the dead. It scattered on the wind, too proud to rest. He didn't even wait for death to claim him. Fëanor burned his body out of existence with sheer rage. Before Gondolin, before Nargothrond, there was Doriath, the first major elven kingdom in Beleriand. It was ruled by Thingol, one of the original elves to awaken at Cuiviénen. But Thingol wasn't just old. He had seen the light of the 2 trees, had walked with the gods, and returned to Middle-earth out of love for Melian, a Maia who became his queen. Sounds romantic, right? But Doriath was built on pride. Thingol refused to help the other elves in their wars against Morgoth. He believed his land was sacred and his judgment above all. This isolationism backfired. Doriath became a trap. When Thingol got greedy for a Silmaril and ordered dwarves to rework it into a necklace, they murdered him. His own realm collapsed soon after, torn apart by revenge, betrayal, and another kinslaying. Doriath was the first kingdom and the first to fall. Finrod Felagund, Galadriel's brother, was everything Fëanor wasn't. Wise, selfless, and beloved by both elves and men. When Beren needed help on his quest to recover a Silmaril, Finrod gave up his crown and followed him, knowing full well it would mean death. He and his men were captured by Sauron and thrown into a dungeon. Every night a werewolf came and killed one of them, and when only Finrod and Beren remained, the wolf came again. This time Finrod didn't sing, he didn't use magic. He broke his chains, fought the beast, and killed it with his bare hands, but died from his wounds. He saved Beren's life at the cost of his own. Tolkien said that Finrod was the fairest of all the elves. Friend of men, beloved of Valar, and faithful unto death. He died how he lived in the dark, against monsters, protecting someone he believed in. Maglor was the second son of Fëanor. A master of music and poetry, he was quieter than his brothers, but still swore the same terrible oath. He helped attack Doriath, helped burn the havens of Syrian, killed his own kin in cold blood, and in the end, like the others, he was cursed with the knowledge that the oath would never give him peace. When 2 of the Silmarils were finally recovered, Maglor and his brother Medros stole them, but the Silmarils rejected them. The jewels burned their hands with divine fire. Medros threw himself into a fiery chasm. Maglor? He wandered to the sea and threw his Silmaril into the waves. Tolkien writes that Maglor lived on, a broken figure singing songs of regret along the shore, never returning to elves or men. He's never seen again. The Athrobeth Finrod. Eärendil, one of Tolkien's later writings, reveals that some of the earliest elves actually fell in love with Melkor before they understood what he was. He told them he was a friend of the Valar, that he could teach them secrets, that he would lead them into greatness, and many believed him. These elves weren't orcs. They weren't corrupted monsters. They were simply deceived. Tolkien hints that these early betrayals were deep wounds in elven history, so shameful that later generations refused to speak of them. Even the Noldor, with all their arrogance and oaths, were horrified by how easily their ancestors were swayed. It wasn't war that doomed the elves first, it was trust in the wrong voice. His name was Eöl, a dark elf of the forest, and he hated the Noldor. He lived in the shadows, under trees, far from the bright halls of the High Elves. But he was a master smith, forging blades from meteoric iron, swords like Anglekel, which would one day kill both a dragon and its wielder. And then one day, Eöl saw Eärendil, a Noldoran princess, wandering his woods. He took her in. Tolkien writes carefully, but it's clear. Eöl didn't just charm her, he trapped her, forbade her from leaving, and only let her go when their son, Meglin, was old enough to travel. But the moment they reached Gondolin, Eöl followed and demanded his son's return. He refused to live among the Noldor. So King Turgon gave him a choice: stay in Gondolin or die. Eärendil chose death and tried to kill his own son on the way down, but he failed. But the damage was done. Meglin grew up twisted, bitter, and full of hate. And later, he would destroy the very city his father cursed. Dragons don't just breathe fire. In Tolkien's world, they speak lies that can twist the mind. When Glaurung, the first of the fire drakes, came to Nargothrond, he didn't destroy the city by force alone. He met Turin Turambar, son of Húrin, and stared straight into his eyes. Tolkien writes that the dragon used his voice and gaze to break Turin's will. He planted doubt, guilt, and false hope, told him lies about his mother and sister. And when Turin hesitated, Glaurung invaded the city, burned its halls, and enslaved its people. It wasn't just a victory of fire, it was a victory of psychological warfare. Turin's failure would lead to years of tragedy, not just for Nargothrond, but for his entire bloodline. Turgon, king of Gondolin, had a secret city, built in the heart of the mountains, invisible to enemies, ruled by pride and tradition. But even he knew the city would fall. Ulmo, the Vala of the sea, had warned him, told him to open his gates, to make alliances, to prepare. Turgon refused. He believed Gondolin was safe, untouchable. So he closed his gates to the world and watched as Beleriand burned. And when Meglin, his own nephew, betrayed the location to Morgoth, it all collapsed. The fall of Gondolin was brutal. Balrogs, dragons, and orcs stormed the hidden city. Fire filled the streets, walls crumbled, heroes died holding stairwells and bridges. Turgon died with his tower, he was warned. He chose silence, and Gondolin paid the price. Glorfindel is mostly remembered from The Lord of the Rings as the elf lord who helps Frodo escape the Nazgul. But the real story begins in Gondolin. During its fall, as the survivors fled the burning city, they were attacked in the mountain pass by a Balrog. Everyone else ran. Glorfindel stayed. He fought the Balrog on a narrow cliff, sword against fire whip with a sheer drop beneath them. The fight ended when Glorfindel tackled the demon, throwing both of them into the abyss. His body was found and buried with honor, and his sacrifice allowed the survivors, including Idril and her son Eärendil, to escape. Later, Glorfindel's spirit was sent back to Middle-earth, one of the only elves ever to return from the halls of the dead. He died saving the last hope of elves and men. Not an elf, not a Maya, and not another god, but a man, Húrin, father of Turin, was captured after the Nirneth Arnoediad, the battle of unnumbered tears. Instead of killing him, Morgoth chained him to a seat on a mountaintop, cursed him, and forced him to watch every sorrow that followed. He saw his children suffer, saw his wife die alone, watched as his name became a curse among elves and men. And yet, he never broke. Even after 28 years, Húrin defied Morgoth, spat in his face, refused to submit. When Morgoth finally released him, it wasn't mercy. It was a weapon. Húrin returned to the world twisted by grief. He blamed old allies, stirred up division, and unwittingly helped destroy the last safe havens of the First Age. But even after all that, Morgoth never got what he wanted. Húrin died unbowed. Before all the battles, before the oaths and murders, before the world was even shaped, there was a song. Tolkien tells us that the world of Arda was sung into being by the Ainur, angelic beings created by Eru Ilúvatar. Each had their part in the harmony, but Melkor's voice went against it. He wove his own themes into the music, twisting, clashing, forcing his will into the melody. Ilúvatar allowed this dissonance, and then responded with new themes, weaving beauty even from rebellion. But the scars remained. That first clash, before time even began, set the pattern for everything that followed. The lies, the pride, the ruin, the Silmarils, the dragons, the exile of the elves. All of it started in that first song. The First Age didn't begin with war. It began with disharmony. If you've made it this far without swearing an oath, burning a city, or fighting a Balrog on a cliff, you're doing better than most of Tolkien's characters, so go ahead, like the video and subscribe. It won't save you from doom, but at least your fate won't be decided by a talking dragon. When all hope seemed lost in the First Age, the elves and men still had one final card to play. His name was Eärendil, son of Idril of Gondolin and Tuor, a mortal man. He was a mariner, a dreamer, and one of the last great figures left unbroken by war. After Morgoth destroyed the kingdoms of the elves and scattered the last survivors, Eärendil took a ship across the seas, seeking the Valar in Aman. No mortal was allowed there. No one had ever made the journey alive, but he did. And when he reached the shores of the Blessed Realm, he didn't beg. He didn't demand. He pleaded for mercy, not for himself, but for elves and men alike. The Valar answered. Eärendil was changed, lifted beyond mortality. His ship was set in the skies, and the Silmaril he carried became the morning star, a light of hope for all future ages. He left his world behind, but the war he started would change it forever. Before Shelob, there was Ungoliant, and she wasn't just a big spider. She was a force of nature. Tolkien never clearly defines what she was, perhaps a spirit of darkness, older than the world itself. What we do know is that Morgoth found her lurking in the void, and convinced her to help him destroy the two trees of Valinor. Ungoliant didn't just bite them, she drained their light, drank their sap, and left them as withered husks. Then she turned on Morgoth, demanding the Silmarils as payment. He refused, so she wrapped him in webs, squeezed him until he screamed, and would have killed him if his Balrogs hadn't arrived and driven her away. Ungoliant fled into the deep south of the world, growing fatter, darker, hungrier, until finally she devoured herself in madness. Tolkien never mentions her again, but her hunger shaped everything. Before he was a Dark Lord, Sauron was Morgoth's lieutenant, and the Lord of Tol and Garhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. When Beren and Lúthien came seeking the Silmarils, Sauron captured them. He imprisoned Beren and planned to kill them both, but Lúthien had help. Huan, the Hound of Valinor, had been gifted to a son of Fëanor, but he abandoned his master and came to aid Lúthien. Huan took on Sauron himself, who fought in the form of a werewolf, then a serpent, then a shadow. And every time Huan defeated him, Sauron lost the duel, and Lúthien forced him to flee his own fortress, humiliated and broken. That's right, the future ruler of Mordor was kicked out of his own tower by a talking dog and an elf maid. Middle-earth has rules, but sometimes those rules are very strange. When the Valar finally agreed to go to war against Morgoth, they didn't send an army. They sent a reckoning, The War of Wrath was the largest conflict in Tolkien's history. Eagles, elves, men, and the host of the Valar descended on Morgoth's fortress in Angband. The battle lasted for decades. Balrogs were hunted and destroyed. Dragons led by Alqualondë the Black darkened the sky. Alqualondë was the largest dragon to ever exist. His wings stretched across the heavens. He was finally slain by Eärendil in the sky, and his body crashed into the mountains, breaking them. Morgoth was chained, cast down, and exiled into the void. But the cost was massive. Beleriand, the entire western continent where the First Age took place, was destroyed, sunk beneath the sea. Entire kingdoms vanished, cities were swallowed, and the world was changed forever. The War of Wrath didn't just end the First Age, it erased it. The First Age ended. Morgoth was gone. But one servant remained, the trusted lieutenant Sauron. After the War of Wrath, Sauron surrendered to the Valar. He begged for forgiveness, but when he was told he had to return to Aman and face judgment, he fled. He never forgot Morgoth's teachings. He had learned the greatest secret of the First Age, that domination can outlast power. So Sauron took a different path. He didn't breed monsters, he offered gifts, knowledge, order. And when he forged the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom, he poured all his will into it, just like Morgoth had once poured his hate into the world itself. It wasn't just a ring, it was a mirror of the Silmarils, an object that holds part of its creator's soul. That's why destroying it broke Sauron completely, because like his master before him, Sauron had become his creation. Before the Silmarils, before Morgoth, before the elves even woke, there was only the void, and then came a sound. Tolkien told us that everything began with music. The Ainulindala, the Song of the Ainur, sung by the spirits of creation under the eye of Ilúvatar. If you're ready to hear how that harmony became a world of oceans, mountains, stars, and sorrow, there's a video for that, and it begins right where this one ends. In the darkness before the fire. The First Age began with light, the light of the two trees, the light of the Silmarils, the blinding pride of the Noldor. And it ended in shadow. We've seen kingdoms rise, Gondolin, Nargothrond, Doriath, each built on secrets, each doomed to fall. Their kings were warned, some ignored those warnings, others died fighting for something greater. We've seen elves sing their way out of hell, wolves bite stars, dragons crash from the sky. We saw Sauron run from a dog. We watched as Fëanor's fire turned on his own children, one by one. As oaths outlived their meaning, as the gods returned not to forgive, but to end the world beneath them. And in the end, only ruin remained. Morgoth was cast into the void. The world was broken, but the flame lived on, buried in rings, whispered in dreams, waiting. Because evil doesn't die in Middle-earth, it just changes shape. The First Age was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it explains everything. So if this didn't ruin your sleep, good. You still have a chance to dream of trees that glow, stars that speak, and cities that fall in silence. But if you're feeling brave enough to click like or subscribe, just remember Fëanor once did something impulsive too. And look how that turned out.